1 mile over. The Ascent. By Richard L. Elsliger. I wait in dread while the backhoe prepares the plot for my final resting place. 2 hours already elapsed by my best estimate, the dial of my Hoyer watch no doubt confirming the irrevocable passage of time that brought me to this horrid and unsacred ground. Immobilized here in the driver's seat of my Lamborghini Countach, I recall the innumerable times I sat behind this very wheel with a streak of absolute terror-induced fear, merely from the act of driving at tremendous rates of speed. Now that terror had returned in a much different way, this time for reasons beyond my control. From my vantage point, I saw the vastness of the pit, the width, the length, and the depth, perfectly cut into the earth to accommodate one Lamborghini Countach and her driver. "It's ready," said the backhoe operator. The two officers nodded, and one opened the scissor door to haul me out. He dragged me to the ground, and I stayed in place, held fast by my restraints, acutely aware that any struggle or protestation at this point might invite an attack that could leave me unconscious, a condition I could little afford at this juncture. I needed my wits if I was to have a chance at survival. The officer stepped in and fired the engine, engaged first gear without difficulty, and maneuvered the clutch with ease, bringing my car to a line with the pit. The officer's level of competence with my car suggested that he'd done this numerous times before with other exotic cars. He knew the dogleg pattern on the shifter, that first gear on a Countach was situated down to the left in defiance to most manual transmissions of the time. He drove the Countach smoothly into the sloping gradient, and in seconds my car vanished from my purview, swallowed whole by the depths of this abominable trench, a loathsome thing designed to be my final resting place, premised upon the most frivolous law I'd ever heard. The officer emerged from the abyss, wiping his hands of dirt, and pointed to me. The second officer launched me to my feet and shoved me forward. "Move along," he said. He and his partner marched me into the pit and shoved me to the driver's seat. The driver's door slammed shut with a tumultuous thud that irritated me more than terrified for the sacrilegious mishandling of my car. In my mind, I derived comfort with the thought that he would pay for such insolence. In the fading twilight, I saw dark morning clouds overhead, imposing and ominous figures drawing near to bear witness to this atrocity of justice, to bear witness to my untimely demise. The idling backhoe revved its engine and scooped up a shovel of dirt from the monolithic pile positioned next to the grave. The operator unceremoniously dumped the earth over the hood of my car. The grainy earthen sound of scattering dirt cast upon my Countach infuriated me. Moments later, another scoop of earth fell from the shovel and pounded the roof with a weighty and ponderous sound. The backhoe operator fell into a steady rhythm and dumped pile upon pile of the wretched cemetery soil over my car. Earth rolled down my windshield and accumulated in filthy piles on the glass. In minutes, the dirt obscured my swooping angular windshield and blocked the diffuse morning light from my eyes. Questions raced through my mind. Would this be the last time I ever saw the light of day? How did I end up here? Why was this happening? I shifted in my seat, hands bound behind my back, and I struggled to hear the voices of the officers and the backhoe operator, their speech muffled, their words no longer discernible, the reality of this burial laid bare to my conscience. I listened more intently for a sound, my eyes wide open to a solid black void, and then all went silent. I retraced the last 15 minutes in my mind and realized that they'd failed to remove the ignition key. I breathed with frightful gasps, the panic evident to even the most casual observer. I needed to control my mind. I closed my eyes and took deep breaths. Over the course of a minute, I settled my nerves and was able to recall by visual memory the layout of my dashboard and switches. I needed to cast some light within the interior. I drew up my legs and performed a contortion act to get my hands to face the gauges. I kneeled on the cramped seat and my fingers found their way to the interior light switch, and I turned it on. I considered this a monumental step toward my freedom and delighted in the illumination generated from such a small act. I paused to think how I would remove these handcuffs. I revisited the inner recesses of my memory and distinctly recalled that a hairpin or perhaps a paperclip would provide a suitable mechanism to release the clasps. But where was I to find such a makeshift tool? It was not unusual that I would use the Countach for work purposes. I twisted on my knees, and with some effort I opened the center console. I made another half-turn and looked inside. Not one, but several paperclips of varying sizes lay at the bottom amidst some chewing gum wrappers. In spite of the dire nature of my predicament, I felt shame for the unsorted mess. With another half-turn, I positioned my hands to the console and reached inside, extracting one of the large paperclips. I thanked the years I spent at work on the mechanical aspects of the Countach. The cramped engine space of 12 cylinders trained my fingers to the buttery finesse of a musician. I held the paperclip with delicacy. If I recalled correctly from years ago, I needed to open up one end of the clip and stick it into the lock and then bend it over. I fumbled with the paperclip and nearly got the cursed thing into the lock before dropping it to the floor. I turned and scanned the area. I checked the carpet, I checked the center console, and heaven help me if it fell between the console and the floor. I could not locate the paperclip after a well-spirited try. I looked once again into the console compartment and found another paperclip of equal size and sturdiness, the last of the large ones, the remainder being small, more flimsy coils of serrated metal. I repeated the procedure and went to work. With my finger, I felt the indentation of the keyhole, then stuck the paperclip in and made a bend. I sensed the metal fold over to my best effort, and I dropped the clip to the passenger seat to inspect my handiwork. The interior light flickered for a moment. A chill transmitted through every sinew of my flesh. The light stabilized, and the flicker vanished as fast as it had manifested. I checked the paperclip with greater alacrity in case the cursed light winked out for good next time. The curvature of the metal on the clip appeared optimal, and I turned my back to reacquire the makeshift tool in my hand. A boom followed by a rumble rattled the ground around me. I stopped fast. Had the evil miscreants returned once more to check their handiwork? Had they perhaps set a tombstone into the ground to mark my resting place? Another boom followed by a distant rumble transmitted frightful sensations through the Lamborghini's tubular chassis. No, they had not returned. The dark and looming clouds I'd witnessed above ground were the harbingers of these low-level decibels that shook the cemetery grounds. I moved with agility and persistence, inserting the paperclip into the lock with a twist. Each time my effort failed and the paperclip threatened to wriggle itself free of my tenuous grasp. I tried again and gave a turn. This time I heard a click of disengagement when I pulled my right hand from my left. The right shackle hung open from its links, and I grasped the paperclip with determination to remove entirely the vile impediment to my freedom once and for all. The left cuff released, and the pair fell to the floor. I kicked them away, deep into the cramped footbox of the Countach. Again, thunderous booms above made their presence known with greater insistence. Interspersed with the raucous thunder, I also heard a steady din of what I determined to be heavy rainfall. I paused to consider the facts of my situation and realized that I had no hope of getting through the Countach windows to dig my way out. Through engineering genius or engineering blunder, the door windows opened but a few inches on either side, as mandated by the Lamborghini factory, for unknown reasons. With such a narrow passageway, I had no hope of digging through the earth to freedom. I considered opening the driver's door and grabbed the handle. The scissor door clicked, and I pushed upward. The door rejected all efforts to open, and I moved to the passenger door with the same result. The weight of burial soil determined to keep me sealed in place. I turned off the interior light to preserve the battery and immersed myself in thought. I estimated the air supply in the cabin might last 5 hours, maybe less. I considered starting the engine and letting the carbon monoxide fumes bring me to a faster and less painful exit. I summarily dismissed that idea. I wanted to live, and besides, the engine needed air for combustion as much as my lungs needed air to breathe, a commodity in short supply from this damnable tomb. I listened in darkness to the pounding rain above me, and I chose to conserve the cabin air with shallow breaths while I considered options. The bleakness of my situation became more readily apparent, and I had in effect ran out of options. I took solace in the thought that I might perish a free man, released from these shackles that bound my hands. It was my fondest hope that whoever should find me, that the story of my demise might be told with the demonstrative evidence left behind. I closed my eyes and drifted toward darkness. I conjured terrible dreams, hellish nightmares of an afterlife I did not wish to visit. In the shadows of such hellish nightscapes, I smelled the damp and foul odors of rot and decay, and my body soaked in the stagnancy of an eternal sleep associated with the grave. I awoke to a stream of water leaching into the Countach through the open window. I rushed to the driver's seat and twisted the key a half turn to activate the power window switches. I shut the windows to keep the water away from the interior. The torrential rainfall maintained a constant bombardment of water over the cemetery grounds above, and the earth that surrounded me was fast becoming saturated with rainwater. How long had I been down here? I checked my Heuer watch, and the illuminated dial told me I'd been here at least 3 hours, maybe more, when measured from the estimated time of my burial. Beyond the windows of the Countach, groundwater pressed against the glass and further infiltrated the cabin through gaps in the body panels. The thought of drowning supplanted the thought of suffocation, and this panicked me in ways so severe I could not articulate. Then the Lamborghini shifted. The movement of the Countach was incomprehensible, given the finality of the burial, yet I could not deny that my car had shifted from its resting spot. Again it moved. The earth was turning, changing, becoming a muddy liquefaction that unearthed the Lamborghini. I sensed ascension, redemption from all of my alleged sins committed in life. Had I already perished? Was the Lamborghini to be my chariot to heaven? The supersaturated ground raised the Countach, and we climbed to the surface. I breached the burial site very much alive, the Countach covered in filth. She turned counterclockwise in a swirl of floodwater. I pushed on the door and it flew open. A stream of water infiltrated the interior, and I left the confines of the old girl. Any attempt to start the car would be a useless gesture, and even if the flooded engine by some miracle would start, the roads were washed out by the torrential rain, making safe passage an impossibility. I wiped the pounding rain from my eyes long enough to see with a modicum of clarity. Dotted among the gravestones were numerous Ferraris and Lamborghinis, peppered with other exotics that were forced to the surface by the pounding rains and floodwaters. I saw occupants in the driver's seats of these exotics, rotted corpses and skeletons, all holding the steering wheels of their rides as if ready to drive away from this place toward hellish destinations unknown. I took one last longing look at the Countach and left her behind, with the full intent to return one day and repatriate her to my garage. I sloshed through the flooded grounds, water up to my hips. I swiveled in a 360-degree sweep in search of potential threats, to include law enforcement that put me here, ready to dive underwater at the first hint of danger. Seeing no threats, I pushed on and made my way to the road, as judged by the line of utility poles. The rains came down in solid sheets of water, obscuring the way out of this hell. The roads flooded. I deemed it unlikely that any cars would dare tread upon this gravel terrain. I paralleled the gravel road, and soon I sensed the 2-lane blacktop beneath my feet. In less than half a mile beyond the stand of trees, I caught sight of the mountainous passage that had brought me to this nightmarish little town. I sped up into a lethargic sprint, my running speed held back by the floodwaters. I remained ever vigilant for any cars. I trusted no one from this town, and had to assume that they were all aligned to capture and destroy anyone guilty of driving an exotic in their rigid and ridiculous community. They would instantly recognize me to be an outsider if I happened to be detected. I exercised the highest level of diligence to avoid capture. I soon left behind the floodwaters and reached the base of the mountainous road. The elevation changed in my favor, and the inclement weather dissipated. I started up the snaky road that led me to this awful town, whose name I could not recognize. The blacktop proved slick from the heavy rainfall, and the steeper the gradient turned, the more my water-saturated driving shoes failed to adhere to the asphalt. The smell of fresh rainfall invigorated me to continue. I needed to get home to determine how I would gather support to expose this corrupt community and put an end to their murderous intentions. Climbing this twisty mountainous road drained a significant part of my energy, but I forged onward. The terrain transitioned from alpine trees to rocky outcrops. I thought I heard something. I stopped at the side of the road and listened intently. The sound of an engine grew nearer, and it was headed in my direction. I pinpointed the vehicle from higher elevations of the mountain pass, and I retreated from the road to seek cover. I identified a sizable boulder and hid. The engine sang an aggressive tone that announced the preamble to a sports car. I captured a glance and saw a flash of red tear across my field of vision. Ferrari, and an old one at that. I wanted to warn him, but in seconds he receded from sight and vanished around a curve in the road. The urgency to intervene demanded I scale to the summit and cross to the other side. I needed to fast mobilize a group to return and expose these monsters. I feared for the driver and his dismal future ahead. I emerged from cover and stepped up my ascent. I turned to glance at the town and saw a cruiser already on the tail of the red Ferrari. I ached for the man's dismal fate, but continued the ascent. The sun materialized from behind cloud cover and shined upon the mountain. A pleasant radiant heat reflected from the blacktop and created a gentle ambient temperature. I pressed on. Within the hour I reached striking range of the peak and the road straightened out. I panted from the rising heat, the temperature having transitioned from pleasant to near unbearable. I heard a sound. I turned to locate the source and saw 2 police cruisers charging up the mountain road at a disturbing rate of speed. I had to assume they saw me, so hiding would not net a favorable result. The cruisers were upon me in less than a minute, and I had no choice but to run. I broke into a mad sprint to the top, determined this time that they would not take me alive. My heart smashed against my chest and pure adrenaline coursed through my circulatory system in a mad rush to flee. The cruisers squealed to a halt and I heard car doors open behind me. "Stop!" shouted a forceful voice. I turned up the pace and ran full bore when the crackle of a gun discharged. A bullet shot past me and struck the bark of a tree. Wooden splinters flew apart, suggestive that the next shots might find their mark. I modified my escape methodology to run with an erratic zigzag pattern to diminish the chance of a fatal shot. I heard the scrambling officers behind me. More shots were fired, and I began to exhaust any reserves of energy I'd had left. I reached the crest of the mountain and crossed the summit into a violent rainstorm that materialized without warning. The transition was like passing through a wall that separated 2 diametrically opposed worlds. I saw the downward winding road ahead, the road that brought me to that wretched town. The voices and sounds of pursuit stopped with an abruptness that defied all logic, and this sudden change caused me to turn and look back. I saw the officers frozen in place, hazy images that blurred and dissolved from my cognizance. The blazing sun of moments before disintegrated and left me baffled. I started back toward the summit to get clarity on what I'd witnessed, but I stopped myself. This couldn't have been a dream, could it? The rain pelted my face and I wiped away the water from my eyes to get a better look. I saw nothing of the landscape that I'd left behind, nothing of the officers in pursuit, but also I saw nothing of my Lamborghini Countach. She was gone, left behind over that ridge. I had read about other dimensions and parallel universes that leaped from the pages of my youthful indulgences in fantasy. Could this be the necessary proof of another dimension? No one would believe me if I told them. I turned away and headed down the winding mountain pass, my clothes drenched and my mind occupied. I could not afford to lose that Lamborghini any more than I could allow them to subject another innocent motorist to their twisted legal system and condemn another man to death for driving an exotic, as they had tried to condemn me. I would make them pay. I would make every last one of them pay. Never come between a man and his machine.